What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?
Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. I love my wife. I'm going to get in trouble for that, aren't I?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dev.
And I'm Cam.
And you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So today I will be telling Cam about the murder of Rebecca, aka Becky, Bliefnick, which took place in Quincy, Illinois. Have you heard of this case before, Cam?
Not by the name, but simply by the intro. I do think I've heard of it. I've definitely heard of it, but I will say I don't know the details of this case. I've just heard of it because of it being an infamous case.
Absolutely. And I still pick this case even though it is a little bit more well known, namely because I feel like people really focus on the wrong part of the case. And I want to talk about what is the most important part of the case, and that's Becky.
Definitely agree with that. And I feel like that happens a lot with these infamous cases where there is a piece of the case that is very sensational. We often lose sight of who was in the middle of the case and who suffered the most. So I'm very glad that we are covering this case in detail and talking about Becky. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot about who she was, what she liked, all the things about her before all of this happened. Before we get into that, though, what we drinking, friend?
So, girl, we are drinking something that I randomly found at the liquor store on my way home. Full transparency, y'all. This episode comes out on Friday, October 17th. It is currently 8 p.m. on Thursday, October 16th, and me and Cam are recording for y'all because I had a long week. She had a long week. You know, we had to do what we had to do, but we were not going to miss an upload for y'all. So because of how hard we are working on this late Thursday night, I think that earns us a follow, a subscribe, just a little something to help us out.
Something. A little something.
Just a little bit. We appreciate your commitment to our podcast because we're committed to y'all. So we are drinking a pre-made lemon drop by Kettle One. And in all honesty, I bought it because I saw it and it was on sale. So figure we'll give it a shot. How bad could it be? Right?
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yep, that's liquor.
It could be pretty bad. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't care for it.
It's very sour. You can taste the lemon. You can taste about 5 of them.
Yeah, you definitely need more simple syrup in this. It's not sweet enough to be a real lemon drop. A real lemon drop is sweet.
Maybe if you put some ice in it or something, it could definitely be a good finisher for like a pregame or something when you're already a little drunk and you don't really care about the taste of things, but it's very sour.
Yeah, I definitely won't be drinking that by itself again. I can doctor it up. I'm going to doctor it up. In all honesty, if you put that in some Prosecco and a sweet wine of some sort,
you got something.
Something could work. Something could work. So before we get into this case, I do want to extend trigger warnings because today's case can be particularly upsetting, which is another thing that aggravated me about the sensationalization of this case because it is very serious. So I want to extend trigger warnings for domestic violence, emotional and psychological abuse, and allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse involving minors. And you'll understand as we get through the episode why I phrased that trigger warning that way, because I don't want to open us up to any litigation by saying something that's not exactly accurate. So to get into today's case, Rebecca, aka Becky, and I will be referring to her as Becky for the majority of this episode, Bernadette Postel Bliefnick, was born Rebecca Bernadette Postel on November 19th, 1981, in Quincy, Illinois, to her parents Bernadette and William Postel. And it was in Quincy, a quiet town along the Mississippi River, where she spent her entire life. She also had an older sister named Sarah, and they were extremely close from a very young age. And it is said that they grew up together playing outside, fishing, and catching frogs. Now, Becky was described as an extremely compassionate and generous person with a deep devotion to her family and her faith. She was also described as an incredibly smart and, quote, brilliantly driven, end quote. And she would go on to graduate as valedictorian from Quincy Notre Dame High School. She then continued her education and attended Quincy University and graduated cum laude with a bachelor's degree in biological science and a minor in chemistry. And it was also at Quincy University that Becky would meet her future husband, Timothy Bliefnick. Now, Timothy Bliefnick was born in 1983, and he was somebody who was described as incredibly smart and athletically gifted. He was a star athlete in high school and excelled in both basketball and football, and his athleticism would also carry into his college career. At Quincy University, he was a celebrated college football player, and he was even named an All-American athlete during his football career. And his impact on the school would be cemented when he was enshrined into the Quincy University Football Hall of Fame in 2019. Now, though Becky and Tim met while they were both at Quincy University, it was actually reported that the couple were only friends while in college and maintained that friendship as they both entered the early stages of their career. So after college, Becky began her career in pharmaceutical sales, where she was a top performing representative, and Tim had a successful career as a sales executive. And it would be 2 years after graduating college that the couple decided to start dating. And the couple would go on to get married in 2009, and they would buy a house in Quincy and have 3 children together. For the first 5 years of their marriage, the couple seemed very happy. Tim was maintaining a successful career in the recycling industry, and Becky had decided to take a step back from her career to become a stay-at-home mom. And it has been said that Tim had dreams of them growing old together. Quote, I'm going to be 85 and sitting on a porch in a rocking chair with her talking about how good life was, end quote. However, things began to change for the couple shortly after the birth of their second child. It was sometime after having their second child that Becky decided she wanted to make a change in her life and her career. Even though she was quite good in her role as a sales representative, it didn't really fit her passions and what she wanted to do in life. Her passion was hands-on medical care. So around this same time, Becky makes the decision to go back to school for nursing. While everyone else in Becky's life was very supportive of her decision, Tim was not, and he was not quiet about it. But if you ask Tim, he claimed that his lack of support was out of concern for Becky's well-being and that the work would be extremely stressful. However, according to Becky's sister Sarah and her friend Shannon, they stated that the relationship became more strained when Becky decided to go back to nursing school. Shannon specifically stated that Becky felt like she was, quote, shouldering most of the load at home, end quote, and that their marriage did not seem to have a true partnership. Sarah specifically emphasized that Tim, quote, not only did not support her, he did not increase his time with the boys, end quote, despite the fact that Becky was busier than ever when she went to school. She also stated that Tim, quote, got progressively more manipulative and controlling, end quote, as Becky progressed through school. However, again, if you were to ask Tim about this, he claimed he wasn't concerned about Becky going to school and was more than happy to take on a larger role with the children, as according to him, quote, I've always been involved with my kids every day, end quote. So this is going to go ahead and set the scene for a lot of today's story, as there's a lot of Tim says this, Sarah says this, Shannon says this, and Becky says this. And we will allow you all at home to figure out who you believe most. But despite the issues in her marriage and the lack of support from her husband, Becky would go on to graduate summa cum laude from Blessing Rayman College of Nursing and Health Sciences. And here is something that is truly amazing and remarkable about Becky, because she would actually get pregnant with her third child while she was in school. And she only missed 1 day of school when she gave birth during her spring break of her senior year.
Oh my gosh. That is commendable, a little scary actually, because I know the toll that pregnancy can put on you and giving birth can put on you. But it's amazing that she was so dedicated to getting her degree that she was like, nothing's going to stop me, not even giving birth. And the fact that she was able to do that and still graduate at the top of her class is amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Becky is that girl. And her dedication to her education would serve as perfect foreshadowing for her career. Because when I tell you, Becky was dedicated to serving both her community and her patients. According to her obituary, quote, according to the members of the St. Peter's Grade School Administration, where Becky volunteered for the last 5 years, Becky was a, quote, tremendous asset and always willing to help or pitch in, end quote. Whether it was coordinating the mother-son events, planning the teacher conference luncheons, or coordinating the school's room mothers. Her love of animals also led her to volunteering at Homeward Bound Wagon, a nonprofit all-volunteer rescue animal group. Becky was also slated to begin volunteering in the spring with Quest Stables, which focus on providing therapeutic riding services.
And the fact that she had time to not only be a nurse, take care of her children, but also volunteer and give back to her community, that's just even more amazing.
Absolutely. When I read Becky's obituary, it was some of the most beautiful, like lovely things I have ever read in an obituary. And unfortunately, I have read a lot of obituaries, but the way that people spoke about Becky was truly different and admirable. And it wasn't just because of her community involvement. She was also highly accomplished professionally, and her patients took notice of that. Becky worked for the Quincy Medical Group in gastrointestinal surgery before transitioning to Blessing Hospital's emergency room. During the COVID pandemic, she additionally worked as a travel nurse at both Northeast Regional Medical Center and Hannibal Regional Hospital in Hannibal. She also became a certified trauma nurse specialist and a sexual assault nurse examiner. And in 2020, Becky was nominated for the International Daisy Award, which honors exceptional care given by extraordinary nurses. The nomination testimonial stated, quote, I got to kiss my husband and tell him how much I love him, all because of Becky. There are no words to express how grateful I am to her for what she did. And by 2023, Becky was working at Blessing Hospital in vascular access and was working towards her nurse practitioner's certification.
She excelled at everything she did. That's what it sounds like to me.
Again, Becky is that girl.
Mm-hmm.
It is giving Becky is that girl. But you know what? Becky was also that mom. Because more than anything, Becky was a dedicated mother to her 3 children. She has been described as the quintessential boy mom, the non-toxic one. And her sister, Sarah, said, quote, the kids were her world, end quote. Her obituary highlighted that Becky would do things like build Transformers costumes that actually transformed into cars for her children and created custom borders and signs for photos, whether it was the first or last day of school for her children. So as you can imagine, Becky's kids meant everything to her. However, her marriage to Tim could have definitely been better. According to Tim, the stress of Becky's nursing career led to a change in her personality. And he suggested that she, quote, struggled with patience and stress a lot, especially when it came to the kids, end quote. And he would go on to say that this stress created conflict between them. So this brings us to 2019. And Becky and Tim's marriage is definitely still on the rocks, but we're going to get to what is definitely the most infamous part of this case. As in 2019, Tim and his side of the family were selected as contestants for America's favorite game show, Family Feud. And it is reported that Becky was supposed to be there for the show, but was unable to attend due to her work obligations. The episode aired in early 2020, and when it did, the following moment played.
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?
Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. I love my wife. I'm going to get in trouble for that, aren't I?
Yeah.
At the time, the answer drew laughs, but also an uneasy reaction. But the answer appeared as the second most popular answer on the board. At the time, Becky reportedly laughed it off, but it rubbed some people the wrong way. But either way, Tim insisted that it was merely a humorous guess designed to win the game and make people laugh. Now, I might be putting an unpopular opinion out here when I say this, but I actually don't think this statement is all that bad.
Yeah.
Even in context of Tim and Becky's relationship not being in a great place. Like, at the end of the day, like, this is a competition game show. You're going to win, I think it's $25,000. And they purposely ask questions to get people in trouble when they say the wrong thing. They purposefully do this as a show. So I really don't think this is this like big gotcha moment that I feel like people try to make it. And maybe I'm on my own and feeling that way, but I just don't feel like it's actually that big a deal.
Yeah, I agree. Because the goal of the game is not to answer with what you think is the right answer, it's to answer with what you think most people would say when asked this question.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people are in unhappy marriages. And a lot of people would think that's a funny answer. The same way if the question was, what's your favorite food to eat at the cookout? Even though my favorite food would probably be some turkey burgers, I know that might get one vote, if any. So I'm probably going to say ribs, even though I don't eat pork. But I'm trying to win the game. So I agree. I don't think it's as big of a gotcha. I could see somebody else in a perfectly happy marriage saying that because they're thinking it's probably on the board.
Exactly. And that was kind of why I wanted to talk about this case, because it was aggravating me how I was looking up information for it. And I just kept saying, oh, Family Feud murderer, Family Feud murderer. And I'm like, he was also on camera for like a grand total of like 2 minutes. Like, he spoke for like 2 minutes and 30 seconds his entire time on the show. And again, I think this falls back into, I don't remember exactly which case it was, but when we were talking about how people will kind of fish for like, oh yeah, they were really creepy and unsettling after the fact, versus even though nobody felt that way in the moment. And that's how I feel about this statement is like, now, of course, now that we know what happens in the case, it's really bad. But
yeah, I think it was the Sonia Caravantes and Rocio Wanenkoff case with the woman who was accused that was her mother's girlfriend. And everyone was like, oh, she was so creepy and everything. But all this was coming after the fact. And yeah, I agree. It definitely feels like you're kind of trying to fit a square peg in a circle hole kind of thing. You're just trying to make something stick.
Right. Absolutely. So sorry if I gave you a little bit of spoilers, but you knew why you were here. I'm sorry. So now we come to January 2021. After 11 years of marriage, Tim would actually be the one to file for divorce from Becky. While Tim alleged that the filing was due to Becky's personality change as a nurse, Becky's sister explicitly stated and believed that Tim filed for divorce because, quote, he couldn't control Becky, end quote. And her new career meant she was gaining independence and making her own money, which reportedly Tim did not like. Initially, Becky didn't want a divorce and to break apart her family. She wanted to salvage the marriage and even suggested marriage counseling, but Tim refused. And once it was finalized that Tim and Becky weren't going to try and work things out, the relationship immediately turned contentious, marked with fights over any and everything in their lives, including money, the home, and especially the custody of the children. In the months that followed the divorce filing, Becky began confiding in her friends and sent several texts about Tim's escalating behavior. Quote, he has screamed in my face, he shoved me in front of the kids, and has thrown things across the room, end quote. She texted another friend, quote, I truly believe Tim has serious mental health problems, and he is becoming more vengeful and unpredictable, end quote. And Becky's friends reported that she looked, quote, mentally and emotionally exhausted, end quote, by the process. As you can imagine, Tim denies these claims, asserting that Becky was the vengeful one and was lying to people. He alleged that Becky said that he had an affair or that he was an alcoholic because she was angry about the divorce. And these allegations would lead to several court filings against the opposite party for protection orders. Tim would actually be the first to file a protection order, alleging that Becky, quote, stalked and harassed, end quote, him. He even offered to the court a cell phone video of an incident at a parent-teacher night as proof that Becky was, quote, combative, end quote. However, Tim's own divorce attorney admitted that she didn't think anyone was trying to hurt anyone in the video and that it was just having a verbal disagreement. In the end, the judge did not grant Tim's order of protection. And just a few days after Tim filed his request, Becky sent the following text to her sister. Quote, "If something ever happens to me, please make sure the number one person of interest is Tim." End quote. So, of course, Sarah is very concerned by this text. And she's like, where is this coming from? And that's when Becky explains that this message was prompted because one of Becky's nursing colleagues was murdered by her partner, and she was scared. Especially because, according to Becky, Tim had allegedly broken into their home, and she knew that he was armed with a gun because she had gifted him a gun a few years earlier. And this part of my research was actually a little unclear because I know for a fact at least one of her coworkers was murdered, but in some of my sources, it actually said that 2 separate coworkers had been murdered by their partners in the last year. So, as you can imagine, Becky is clearly scared and freaked out.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, we're going through a rough patch, or our relationship is rocky, or we're arguing, but he would never go that far. That can never happen to me, until you're in that situation where it does happen to you. Even people who are in physically abusive relationships think, oh, well, they would never go that far. They would never take my life away. They might be violent, but they're not going to go that far until they do, and it's too late.
Absolutely. And it has been said that she texted her sister and said, oh my God, this is real. This really happens. And it's sad that she had to have that realization of like, my ex is unstable and I genuinely am now fearful of my life given this context.
Yeah.
And after hearing all this, Sarah is immediately like, you need to go get some help and file for a petition with the court. And Becky decides to do just that. So Becky filed her own order of protection against Tim. In it, she alleged Tim had, quote, entered her residence without permission and repeatedly facilitated interactions, end quote. However, just like Tim's petition, Becky's request was also denied. Despite both of these denials, the judge did issue a final judicial order. In it, the judge mandated that Tim and Becky stay away from each other's residences, except for child exchanges. But most importantly, the judge also ordered for Tim to return the 9mm handgun Becky had gifted him, as the gun was registered in her name. However, Tim insisted that he hadn't seen the gun in 3 years and, quote, didn't have it, end quote. And reportedly, the gun in question was never returned to Becky.
You don't just lose a gun.
You don't. And if you do, you are a very irresponsible gun owner.
Exactly.
So, to recap, Becky and Tim are in the middle of a very messy divorce, fighting each other over everything, and even filing for petitions against each other. So I'm sure you can imagine that the custody battle for the 3 children was even more ugly. But by early 2023, it seemed like the proceedings were finally going to come to an end, when a final trial date was set for early March of 2023. And allegedly, this court date was going to get ugly because Becky was preparing to make some serious allegations against Tim's father. Court documents revealed that Becky had significant concerns about Tim's father, Ray, and she did not want him to be around her 3 children unsupervised. And she had even filed a protection order against Ray, although it was also denied. The documents go on to further explain that Becky had allegedly gathered witnesses who were prepared to testify at the upcoming divorce trial about allegations concerning Ray's history of, quote, perversion and abusing minor children, end quote, many years prior. And I want to stress that these are just allegations, and Ray vehemently denies these allegations. Ray also has never been charged with any criminal offenses related to these allegations or any other related allegations. But it is well known that this is what was going to be discussed during the final hearing to discuss the parenting agreement between Tim and Becky. So, in late February of 2023, just a week before the final hearing, Becky had undergone some sort of abdomen surgery and needed to get some time off to recover. So she texted Tim asking him if he could keep the children for an extra night because she wasn't feeling well. And Tim agreed, and the couple didn't communicate for the rest of the night. So the following morning of February 23rd, 2023, Tim dropped off their 3 children at school, and Becky was supposed to pick them up that afternoon. So, according to Tim, he received a call from the school letting him know that Becky had failed to arrive at school at 3 p.m. to pick up the children. So Tim makes his way to school to pick up the children, calling Becky as he does. But since he isn't allowed to go to Becky's house because of the court order, Tim decided to text Becky's father, William, saying he hadn't been able to reach Becky and asked for him to go check on her. So Becky's father drove to her Quincy home, and when he went there, he found that Becky's car was still in the garage. And through further investigation, he found that her front door was unlocked, which was completely out of character for Becky. So he enters the home and begins looking for her. And as he made his way upstairs, he found every parent's worst nightmare as he discovered his daughter, 41-year-old Rebecca Bernadette Postel Bliefnick's lifeless body on the bathroom floor. And upon discovery, he immediately ran out of the house and called the police.
We've said it so many times, but a parent should never have to bury their child, let alone come upon the body of their child. That is so sad.
Absolutely. And William has described it as the worst day of his life. And it is utterly heartbreaking that he had to experience that. So now let's get into the investigation of the case. As police are investigating the home, they quickly determine that the killer must have broken into the home by prying open an upstairs window in one of the children's bedrooms. And they were able to find tool marks visible on the window. And they were also able to determine that the killer likely used a patio chair to scale up the side of the house. Inside the home, police are quickly able to determine the killer's path from the children's bedroom to Becky's bedroom. Becky's bedroom door had been violently kicked in, and investigators found one of the most eerie pieces of evidence in this case for me. Because behind the bedroom door, investigators found Becky's phone. And after police are able to do a phone extraction of Becky's phone, they found that she had dialed 91126 at 1:11 and 10 seconds a.m. However, the call never went out.
I can imagine she was probably like shaking and couldn't type the numbers properly.
Absolutely. Because somebody's actively kicking your door in and you're trying to call 911 when you've probably been woken up out of your sleep.
Right.
You're discombobulated.
You're already not feeling well, probably on medicine.
Absolutely. That was the most heartbreaking part of this case for me. Because I was like, her phone was in her hand and she was trying to call for help and she couldn't. And we're going to get into, there's more heartbreaking parts about this case that we're going to get into. So brace yourselves. It's going to start pulling at your heartstrings real bad in a little bit. So based on this information, the investigators believe the intruder entered around 1:11 a.m. and Becky attempted to call for help but was unable to make the call. In addition to Becky's phone, investigators collected other evidence, including a partial shoe print near the entry, 8 spent 9mm shell casings, and small pieces of plastic around Becky's body. The plastic was an anomaly and initially puzzled investigators. The investigators also found no evidence of a robbery and concluded that the evidence left behind pointed clearly to a personal and intentional attack. So police continued their investigation by canvassing the quiet Quincy neighborhood, and they seemed to hit the jackpot because Becky's next door neighbors, the Hymans, had a security camera aimed at their driveway, and this driveway ran alongside Becky's house. However, the camera didn't capture anything on the night of the murder. However, it did capture an unusual activity 24 hours prior to to the murder. So, at 1:05 a.m., the night before the murder, a person was seen walking down the driveway towards the back of Becky's house and then returning 48 minutes later. And then police find a similar incident occurred a week earlier on Valentine's Day. Now, on Valentine's Day, the neighbor had actually seen the alert that somebody was outside of Becky's house and texted Becky immediately. Becky responded the next morning saying that she hadn't seen anything, but that she had heard voices and saw that her motion activated light turned on. And she also said it made her feel, quote, very paranoid, end quote. And now that investigators had established a pattern, investigators now suspected this person in the videos wasn't a random prowler, but someone watching the house. So they expand their search to look for other cameras in the area. And when they do, further video analysis from nearby cameras reveal a person riding a bike towards Becky's house shortly before the murder and right away after the murder. And of course, this was suspicious because people in Quincy don't usually ride their bikes in the middle of the night in the winter.
Yeah, this is Illinois.
Yes, ma'am.
What month is it again?
February.
No.
You don't ever feel the overwhelming urge to have a little, 1 a.m. bike ride in the dead of winter?
Not at all.
I agree with you, Cam. I agree with you. I agree with you completely. So, with all of this camera footage, investigators are able to link the biker seen on the street videos with the person seen in the neighbor's driveway footage. But there was just one itsy bitsy little problem with these videos as the police were collecting them. The video quality is hot garbage.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's nighttime. It's a bike rider. Even though it's 2021,
2023.
Even though it's 2023, I'm sure the video quality still wasn't great.
Absolutely. One day we will have 4K cameras in our security footage. It has still yet to be that day. And it wasn't that day in February of 2023. But police are able to get one very important, clear detail from the footage. And that was that the bike did not appear to have any reflectors on the wheels, which is also illegal, which is why police noticed it. So while investigators were busy reviewing the crime scene, an autopsy was conducted on Becky's body. And the autopsy would reveal that Becky had been shot a total of 14 times. And it went on to reveal that none of the wounds were immediately fatal. The pathologist also reported that she was shot through her hands, arms, lungs, and spine, with one shot severing her spinal cord and causing paralysis. And they conducted that it would have taken minutes, not seconds, before Becky ultimately died.
That is overkill in the cruelest way. Because sometimes you see overkill where the first or second blow or hit takes the person out, and then the attacker just continues. But to shoot somebody so many times and have none of those be fatal shots and just allow them to bleed out, that's overkill. It shows contempt and hatred for that person. And to me, it also shows that you wanted to watch them suffer.
That part. And that's why it's so cruel, because the pathologist goes on to say that that's exactly what happened, that she laid on her bathroom floor, paralyzed and bleeding out. And that is how this lovely woman left this earth. So now that the police have all of this information, it's time to start finding people of interest. And I'm sure we can all guess who is at the tip top of the list.
Yep. And honestly, this is the person who's going to be the main person of interest in any case. And that's going to be the spouse or the partner.
Or in this case, the estranged spouse and partner. So of course, Timothy Bliefnick, we're going to need to talk to you, buddy. Once police learned of the couple's tumultuous divorce and Becky's documented filings and the upcoming trial, Tim immediately became the prime suspect. And once they started closing in on Tim, investigators soon located the most crucial piece of evidence, a bike with no reflectors on the wheels, found abandoned in a bush less than half a block away from Tim's house. And this discovery, in addition to the knowledge of the couple's marital status, would give police all the ammunition they needed to obtain a search warrant for Tim's home and car. And on March 1st, 2023, police executed that search warrant on Tim's house and car. And on March 13th, just over 2 weeks after Becky's murder, Timothy Bliefnick was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and home invasion. He was held without bond. Now, Tim did provide an alibi for the time of the murder, claiming he was home with their 3 children. And Tim insisted he was innocent. And in later interviews, he even said, quote, "I'm innocent. I didn't kill Becky. The idea of murdering someone, let alone the mother of my kids, is not any part of who I am," end quote. Now, Tim's arrest would go on to make national news, namely due to his Family Feud appearance and what is now considered to be an infamous answer that he gave. And people really followed this case and wanted answers. And fortunately for the public, and most fortunately for Becky's family, they wouldn't have to wait long to get answers in this case, because Tim invoked his right to a speedy trial, meaning prosecutors Josh Jones and Laura Keck had only 90 days to prepare their case and take Tim to trial. And the trial would begin on May 23rd, 2023, exactly 3 months after Becky's murder. I just want to take a quick moment to talk about, I didn't realize that Illinois had such a short, speedy trial. Right. Most places, it's 6 months. You have to be tried within 6 months. 90 days is crazy. So your ducks need to be in a row.
Listen,
when you make that arrest is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I can imagine the DA in Illinois probably like, y'all better have everything you need and have it right now, because we don't have time to be chasing down evidence while we're prepping for the trial.
Hello. And honestly, when I was reading this, I think a lot of people have this idea, especially when it comes to Chicago, right? Of it being so dangerous and they just let criminals go and let criminals run the streets. But in all honesty, if I only got 90 days to prove a case, I don't have time to just be arresting people because I think they did it and then figuring out the evidence later.
Right.
I need to have my ducks in a row completely because I got 90 days to make this work. And personally, if I were a defendant, I'm invoking you got 90 days to make this work.
And that's the thing. Smart criminals know the law, and they are going to use that to their benefit.
Every time. So now let's get into Timothy's trial. So the prosecution begins presenting their case, and they start with the evidence they collected in the search warrant. The prosecution presented that investigators found spent shell casings in Tim's house, and an expert testified that 27 of these casings found in Tim's home were fired from the exact same gun used to kill Becky, which was later testified to be the same gun that Becky was demanding be returned to her in the divorce. The prosecutor, Josh Jones, stressed that each firearm leaves a unique, quote, fingerprint, end quote, on the casing. And that's how they were able to connect the murder weapon to Tim. Next, the prosecution focused in on the random pieces of plastic found at the crime scene. And it turns out that the plastic was remnants of Aldi grocery bags, stacks of which were found in Tim's home. The prosecution argued that Tim fired the gun through the grocery bags as a makeshift silencer or as a casings collector. But not only did they have the bags, they also were able to pull DNA off of the plastic bags. DNA that was, quote, more likely than not, end quote, contributed by Tim. And they were also able to connect the DNA under Becky's fingernails to Tim as well.
Now, the DNA from the plastic bags, were those the remnants of the bags found at the scene, or were those the bags in Tim's house?
The bags at the scene. Again, though, it is more likely than not. It wasn't to a medical certainty.
Got it.
So I will make that disclaimer. Police also found a crowbar in Tim's basement and An expert testified that they found microscopic consistencies with the tool marks on Becky's prying window. However, they were not able to confirm as a complete scientific match. Again, just some suspicious circumstantial evidence. But the most damning evidence the prosecution presented was the evidence found on Tim's phone. Tim's phone contained several damning searches in his history, including, quote, how to make a homemade pistol silencer, end quote, quote, how to open my door with a crowbar, end quote, quote, how to clean gunpowder off your hands, end quote, and quote, average Quincy Police Department response time, end quote. The prosecution argued that these searches proved premeditation, and these searches contained private crime scene details not released to the public. Now, before I continue, I'm going to fill you guys in with a little bit of context that I didn't really know how to place in the natural order of this episode. So, while Tim maintained that Becky was obsessed with him and was going out of her way to make his life difficult, Becky had actually started moving on and dating, and her new man was at Becky's home the evening of Valentine's Day, the first known time that Tim went to Becky's house without her knowledge. So, now with that context, prosecutors also revealed during the trial that Tim's phone also contained over 200 rapid-fire searches for the VIN number and license plate number of Becky's boyfriend's truck conducted at 1:10 a.m. on Valentine's Day.
That's actually insane because to get the VIN number, you got to get up close and personal to that car.
Absolutely. So we know for a fact you were standing outside of her house on Valentine's Day. And you had already been ordered by the judge to not be at her house. So what you doing there?
Do we know if there was location data on his phone?
I do not. The trial was recorded. I didn't have time to watch the entire trial.
I could also see a world where he left his phone at home. Depending on how far he was away from Becky's home, I could see a world where he left the phone at home. He didn't need it because he knows how to get there.
Yeah, I could definitely see that for the night of the murder.
Yeah.
So according to the prosecutors, this search proved that the prowler seen on camera was Tim, who was obsessed with Becky and her new relationship. And finally, information from Tim's phone showed he used a fake Facebook account whose name was John Smith, by the way. Yes, I am dead serious. To look up a blue Schwinn bike for sale, matching the description of the reflectorless bike found abandoned near his house. And then, in closing argument, the prosecution laid out what they believe happened in the early morning hours of February 23rd, 2023. They argued that the murder was a planned and premeditated, quote, act of domestic violence, end quote, carried out by Tim Bliefnick against his estranged wife, Becky Bliefnick, just 1 week before their highly contested divorce trial, in order to prevent the allegations Becky had against Tim's father, Ray, from coming out. The prosecutors argued that this information coming out publicly was something Tim wanted to prevent at all costs, stating that Tim was, quote, losing control, end quote, and saw the murder as a way to solve this major problem. According to the prosecution, Tim knew that Becky was home alone and vulnerable and saw this as his opportunity to take her out of the equation. Tim rode his bicycle in the middle of the night, leaving their 3 children alone in his home to Becky's home, and scaled the house using a patio chair to reach the 2nd floor. He gained entry by prying open a window in one of the children's bedrooms that he knew would be empty. They argue that a random intruder wouldn't walk past 3 possible entrance points just to choose a 2nd floor window that happened to belong to a child who wasn't home. Tim then made his way to Becky's room, violently kicking in and breaking down the door to confront her. At approximately 1:11 a.m. and 10 seconds, Becky tried to call 911 on her cell phone, but the phone was knocked out of her hand and found behind the door. Becky then ran into the bathroom, where she was cornered and shot a total of 14 times. Prosecutors stated that it was an execution and noted that the shots were fired with the 9mm handgun that Becky had bought for Tim, covered with an Aldi grocery bag as a makeshift silencer, leaving plastic shreds all around her body. And after he shot her 14 times, Becky lay paralyzed and bleeding slowly to death on the bathroom floor for minutes. He then returned home and took his children to school as if he hadn't murdered their mother just hours before. And then Tim went about his day before returning to the children's school to pick them up, as the school did not call him to let him know that Becky did not pick up their children. Tim then took it upon himself to text Becky's father, prompting him to go and be the one to find Becky, his youngest daughter's body.
Oh my gosh. Especially the point that the school never called him to pick the children up. The fact that he somehow knew Becky wasn't going to pick them up, even though that would have been their agreed upon plan, that definitely does it in.
Absolutely. But to me, I want to take a moment to talk about how cold and evil you have to be to send a father to find his dead daughter.
Yeah. Knowing what you did to her.
Knowing what you did to her, and with you being a father. Clearly not a very good one, but a father nonetheless.
And then I think with these cases, especially when it's around custody rights, because you see it with both mothers and fathers, you think you're going to get away with this, but you end up not getting away with it. Now your children don't have either parent to support them.
Exactly. That's why it's always so freaking selfish to me. Because even in Tim's case, I don't understand at all how you thought you were going to get away with this. It is documented in court records that y'all hate each other.
Right.
It is documented that you guys have been having this nasty divorce for 2 years. One, of course, you're going to be suspect, number one. And two, you allegedly did all of this so that you would still have access to your children. And now you're losing access to your children. You have traumatized your children for life. So now it's time to get into the defense's case. And despite the gravity of the charges, the defense chose not to call any witnesses, claiming they were, quote, strapped on time and funds, end quote.
Whose fault is that?
Come on now. You can't invoke your speedy trial rights and then be complaining that the trial is coming up too quickly.
Right. You wanted this.
So stand 10 toes down.
Mm-hmm.
However, Tim's defense attorney, Casey Snack, argued both during her opening statement and closing argument that the case was, quote, dripping with reasonable doubt, end quote. She challenged every piece of evidence. She dismissed Becky's fears in her text to her friends as merely, quote, a lot of girl talk, end quote, and noted that there were no pictures of bruises or any physical abuse allegations, which I want to take a moment to talk about. I don't like this attorney. I don't like this attorney's argument. I think it is awful. Because one, for you to just be like, oh, it's just girl talk. She was saying that she was scared of him and that he was putting his hands on her. That's just girl talk. Incredibly rude. Two, I don't think anybody ever claimed physical violence in a court of law anyways.
Right. And when she did claim physical violence, she said that he shoved her, which that's not going to leave a bruise.
Exactly. And even then it was, he shoved me in front of the kids. She was more upset that he did it in front of the children.
Right.
Than that he put his hands on her. And I'm going to continue talking about what his attorney said, but I really just feel like she made a very poor choice in the angle that she was trying to take this case from.
Mm-hmm.
Like, attack the evidence, don't attack the victim. I feel like you're never going to win as a defense attorney if you try to attack the victim.
Very true.
I just don't ever think that's a good look. So Casey also argued that the DNA evidence was inconclusive because it was more likely than not, and the DNA could potentially belong to one of the children. She also stressed that the crucial internet searches lacked time and date stamps, suggesting that they could have been done after the murder when Tim was trying to figure out what happened. The defense also maintained that the video footage was too blurry to identify anyone. And she also pointed out that police failed to match the partial shoe print at the scene to any of the shoes seized from Tim's home. I will give a mouse a cookie and acknowledge that this is the only good point she made. And finally, she argued that the allegations against Ray were, quote, old news, end quote, and were already part of the public court records and didn't provide a rationale for murder. In response to this, the prosecutor, Josh Jones, countered the reasonable doubt argument, arguing that while no single piece of evidence was enough to convict, the combination of the data gaps, the computer searches, the biker videos, the VIN search timing, and the matching shell casings created one, quote, inescapable conclusion that it was Mr. Bliefnick, end quote. And after a 6-day trial, the case goes back to the jury. And after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Timothy Bliefnick, guilty of first-degree murder. And Timothy Bliefnick was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of home invasion. I don't know why.
Is it possible that in some jurisdictions, a murder committed in the act of a felony is a separate charge?
Oh, yes, that absolutely is. Because there's felony murder and then there's murder.
Yeah.
So it could be a situation of he was found guilty of felony murder on top of the murder. But I'm not exactly sure why it was 2 counts, but my research said it was 2 counts. And on August 11th, 2023, Tim returned to the Adams County Courthouse for sentencing, where Judge Robert Aiden had the option of sentencing Tim to just 45 years to life. During the sentencing, Becky's family delivered powerful impact statements. Her mother, Bernadette Postel, spoke directly to Tim. Quote, when you murdered Becky, you took from your boys the person who loved them most on this earth. Your soul is black with hate. Your heart has only love for itself. You should never be allowed to be free again. End quote. Becky's sister, Sarah, addressed Tim with heartbreaking clarity. Quote, your children's future will be forever impacted by your crime. They're already suffering. Maybe you should have Googled childhood PTSD in between your internet searches for homemade silencers and VIN numbers. End quote. When offered a chance to speak, Tim Bliefnick declined to make a statement. Judge Robert Adrian then delivered his sentence, referencing the precise nature of the premeditation.
Mr. Bliefnick, you researched this murder, you planned this murder, you practiced this murder, you broke into her house, and you shot her 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times. I don't know how long it took you to do that. Some of those shots were fired while she was lying on the ground. And you did all of that while your children were upstairs at your house, lying snug in their beds. The court believes that the appropriate sentence for each of the 2 counts of first-degree murder would be natural life in prison. Court believes that the 3rd count of home invasion, appropriate sentence is life in prison.
Tim Bliefnick was sentenced to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. He continues to maintain his innocence to this day and immediately began the process of filing an appeal. In his appeal, he argued that the court erred in admitting Becky's hearsay statements about her fear of Tim, that there was a conflict of interest between the judge and the lead prosecutor. Apparently, Josh Jones was a witness in an unrelated case against Judge Adrian, and that the prosecutor made arguments that were not supported by evidence during his closing argument. However, in November 2024, the Appellate Court of Illinois' 4th District affirmed both the conviction and the life sentence. Since Tim's arrest, he has not been allowed any contact with his children, and Becky's 3 children are living with Becky's parents, William and Bernadette. Becky's family has vowed to honor Becky's legacy by ensuring the children, quote, have the life they deserve, end quote. A GoFundMe was established to support the children and possibly start a scholarship fund in Becky's name. Rebecca, Becky, Bernadette, Postel, Bliefnick is remembered for her fierce love, compassion, generosity, her random humor, and her deep kindness. The world lost a truly phenomenal woman, a dedicated nurse, and a devoted mother. And I will leave you all with the words of Becky's sister. Quote, if we can learn anything, if somebody reaches out to you and says that they are scared, that they believe their partner is capable of violence, you need to believe them and make an effort to make sure they are safe, end quote. And that is the end of our story, friend.
I hope too that her children find some peace and healing in the next several years, decades. I feel like something like that is going to take a lifetime. They'll never be truly healed. And the only solace I can find is that they did get to experience life with their mother before she passed. I know there are some kids who unfortunately don't even get that time. And I don't know how old her youngest child was.
Her youngest child was approximately 4 or 5 at the time of her death.
Yeah. But it's just so sad. Like I said, you took away both their parents because they have no contact with you now. Their mother is gone. All for what? All for something that, despite how difficult it is to go through child custody hearings and go through divorce, it is doable. Lots of couples do it. You can hate her, despise her, all this stuff, but none of that warranted you taking her life away.
And if you loved your children, you would have worked it out.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, even if you do not love that person anymore, you don't want to be with that person anymore. And, you know, people have said that, like, the person you married is not the person you divorced. But when you love your children, when you want to protect your children, when you want to do what's best for your children, even if you no longer love this person and you're no longer with this person, you figure out how to coexist with that person and co-parent with that person because you love your children.
Exactly.
And you want your children to live a good life. And you want to show your children that just because mommy and daddy aren't together anymore doesn't mean that we love you guys any less, and doesn't mean that we're going to be outwardly hostile to each other.
Right.
That's the example you set for your children.
Right. And I know plenty of people who were like, you know what? I do not like that person, but they are the parent to my child. And because of that sole fact, I have the utmost respect for them.
Exactly. And that's how it should be. But yeah, it's just one of those things where, especially in this case, it's just so unbelievably stupid. Again, given the context that you have this big trial coming up, you guys have had this contentious divorce this entire time. It is documented that you guys are filing a bunch of stuff against each other and that the custody battle has been ugly. And then your ex-wife mysteriously dies.
Right. And the shell casings.
Come on now.
Shell casings are as good as fingerprints. And if you can't explain why the shell casings that were found at the scene match the shell casings you have in your home, your case is essentially dead on arrival.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up again, because it reminded me of a point I wanted to talk about. You technically killed this woman with her own gun because that registration was in her name.
Right.
Yeah, it was a gift for you, but that registration was in her name.
And the judge had ordered you to return it.
Exactly, which means you lied in court, which obviously is probably the lowest tier of stupid that Tim has done. But that's also what screams premeditation to me 2 years ago.
Right.
Because she asked for that gun back very shortly into your divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Why else would you need to keep it unless you weren't planning to do something crazy to her?
Exactly.
And again, Becky was such a sweet, honorable person. Like, again, I never saw anybody say one bad thing about Becky. And I will reiterate again, Becky was that girl. And I wish her family all the healing in the world. I wish her father specifically a lot of healing, because he had to find her like that. And I wish her children to grow up and learn stories of just how magnificent and lovely their mother was. And this case specifically really reminds me why Cam and I tell true crime stories the way we do, because I was really tired of seeing nothing but Family Feud murderer across the headlines, to the point where it took me a solid 15 minutes to learn Becky's name when I was beginning to research this case. And that's ridiculous.
Right. That is actually crazy that so many articles focus on the sensational nature and don't even mention the victim's name.
Exactly. But here, we will talk about Becky.
Right. And she will be front and center.
Hello.
So, as we wrap up today's discussion, we are going to move into our segment called Today in Crime, where we discuss a crime or crime-related event that took place on this day. So, on this day, October 17th, 2002, police would receive a major break in the case of the DC sniper. For over 2 weeks, the Washington, D.C. area had been under a paralyzing wave of terror. Starting on October 2nd, the DC sniper had randomly gunned down people going about their daily lives, people pumping gas, mowing the lawn, and shopping. In total, 10 people were killed and 3 were critically wounded. The attacks were seemingly random, completely unpredictable, and had put the entire community on edge. The investigation into the DC sniper was massive, with multiple agencies working around the clock. But the breakthrough came, ironically, from the snipers themselves. Because on October 17th, someone would call in with a bizarre tip, not only claiming responsibility for the DC sniper killings, but also for an earlier liquor store robbery and murder in Montgomery, Alabama. This detail was the key, because once investigators verified that the Alabama crime had taken place, they also realized that police had collected fingerprint and ballistic evidence at the scene. Within days, that evidence led to a massive development when the fingerprints were matched to a previous arrest and tied to an individual named Lee Boyd Malvo, who became the first suspect. When investigators reviewed Malvo's records, they quickly found the name of the second suspect, John Allen Muhammad. With both the suspects identified, law enforcement got to work finding them. The FBI quickly linked Muhammad to a blue 1990 Chevy Caprice with New Jersey license plates. This information was broadcast immediately, and the hunt for the two would end just days later. Late on the night of October 23rd, the Caprice was spotted at a rest stop in Maryland. A tactical team swarmed the area, and in the early hours of October 24th, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo were arrested as they slept, ending the month-long nightmare. Inside the car, investigators would find the truth of how the attacks were carried out. The Caprice had been turned into a quote-unquote rolling sniper's nest, with a hole cut in the trunk near the license plate to fire shots from within. They also recovered the Bushmaster .22 caliber rifle used in the attacks. The arrest of the pair was the end of the attacks, but the legal case was just beginning. Both Malvo and Muhammad were eventually convicted in multiple court cases in Maryland and Virginia, receiving sentences of life without parole. Muhammad also received the death penalty and was executed in 2009. And that is what happened on this day in crime. If you found the story interesting, leave a magnifying glass emoji in the comments.
Girl, man's own hubris will set them up every time.
Right. Every single time. But I can imagine for the people that lived in this area at the time, just how scared they were, because they had no idea who was doing this, and the attacks were seemingly random all throughout the DC metro area.
Right. And that is absolutely terrifying, to have to live your life terrified to leave your house.
Right.
So I'm glad that their own hubris caught up with them. And in all honesty, that's how the majority of killers and people who don't get caught for a while, that's how they always get caught. Is they're like, dang, y'all ain't gonna catch me? Oh, I can just play in y'all face and y'all ain't gonna catch me.
Exactly. That whole nana boo boo mentality.
Come on now. And you gonna get got every time. Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope, that's all I got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on tonight's episode. I'd also like to thank Court TV and 48 Hours for providing most of the material in today's case. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
And listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to tell a friend and leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish podcast. And if you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.